This summer, my daughter's obsession with her phone wasn't teenage distraction. It was a high-stakes negotiation that ended with armed mercenaries surrounding our quiet cottage. When the garden harvest vanished overnight, I realized the only thing she was cultivating was a secret far more dangerous than heirloom tomatoes. The silence at the cottage used to be a comfort, the sound of the wind through the pines, the distant lapping of the lake water against the worn dock. This summer, however, the silence was heavy, punctuated only by the hollow echo of my own voice. We drove up the familiar gravel road in early June. The cottage, the heron's nest, looked exactly as it always did. Weather-beaten cedar shingles, that slightly listing chimney, the smell of damp earth and pine needles clinging to everything. I'd spent the last month cleaning, airing out the musty winter blankets, and preparing the vegetable patch. It was tradition. Every year, my daughter, Clara, would race out of the car, arms already anticipating the mud and the freedom of the woods. Clara is 17 now. She used to be sunlight distilled into a child. All skinned knees and breathless stories about frogs and fairies she'd met by the creek. This year, she was different. She was porcelain and sharp edges, encased in a shell of perpetual distraction. She didn't even look up when we arrived. She was already attached to the glowing rectangle in her hands, earbuds jammed so deep I wondered if they'd fuse with her temporal lobes. "Clara, honey, say hello to the place," I'd tried, standing on the porch steps, inhaling the sweet, clean air, trying to inject some of that summer magic into the moment. She offered a single, strained syllable, a sort of strangled before dragging her oversized duffel bag toward the small, dusty bedroom overlooking the overgrown berry bushes. The first few weeks were agonizingly polite. I cooked elaborate meals, her favorites, the ones she used to devour sitting cross-legged on the checkered tablecloth, and she ate them silently, eyes fixed on her phone screen, which she held so close I worried about the strain on her developing retinas. "How was the hike today, sweetie?" I'd ask after she returned from a solo walk down to the lake, always returning without swimming, without skipping a beat. "Fine." "Did you see any deer?" "Nope." "Did you want to help me weed the tomato stakes? They're getting unruly." The tomato patch was my pride and joy, the reason we drove 2 hours out of the city every summer. It needed tending if we wanted those late August heirlooms. "I'm busy, Mom." Busy meant scrolling through TikTok or texting friends who were, presumably, enjoying their own vibrant, real-life summers elsewhere. I tried everything. I brought out the old watercolor set we used to use, leaving it open on the picnic table with a fresh pad of paper. She stepped over it without a glance. I put on the old vinyl records, Joni Mitchell, the soundtrack to my own cottage memories, and she cranked her headphones louder. By mid-July, I gave up. I started doing all the chores myself, the mowing, the fishing, for my own supper, since she refused anything that hadn't come vacuum-sealed from a grocery store freezer. The constant fight against the aggressive weeds in the garden. I stopped asking her about her friends, stopped trying to prompt conversations about college applications that were looming just around the corner. The silence between us was so complete, I sometimes forgot she was even in the next room. It felt like I was renting a cabin with a ghost who occasionally needed Wi-Fi access. I remember one particularly hot afternoon. I was hacking away at a stubborn patch of thistle near the south fence line, sweat stinging my eyes. Clara was sitting on the porch swing, shielded from the sun by the overhang, staring blankly at her phone. I fell, tripping over a root, scraping my elbow badly enough that it bled freely onto my denim shorts. I stood up slowly, wincing, and looked over at her, waiting. Maybe this raw, physical evidence of vulnerability would snap her out of her digital trance. Maybe she'd rush over with antiseptic wipes and a concerned furrow in her brow, the way she used to when she accidentally hammered her thumb building a birdhouse at age 10. She didn't even flinch. Her thumb kept flicking across the screen. I wiped the blood off with a handkerchief, the sting a dull throb, and walked inside to clean the wound, the silence following me like a shadow. I looked out the kitchen window at the vast, burgeoning garden, the rows of green promising an abundance that suddenly felt meaningless without someone to share it with. "Fine," I whispered to the empty room, tying the bandage tight. "You want to ignore me? Fine. I'll just talk to the sunflowers." The summer wore on, slow and lonely. August arrived, bringing cooler nights and that distinct earthy scent of ripening things. The tomatoes were exploding. Deep reds, sun-warmed yellows, mottled purples. The squash vines were choking the pathways, and the corn stalks stood sentinel tall, their silks turning brown. The garden was a riot, a triumph of cultivation against the wild backdrop of the forest. I felt a strange, possessive pride in the bounty because I had nourished it alone. Then the first frost warnings started flashing on the local radio station in the early morning broadcasts. It was time. Harvest time. I woke up the next morning, ready to tackle the enormous task of picking everything before the temperature plummeted. I went straight to the shed to pull out the old crates. I walked past Clara's room, assuming she was sleeping in late, escaping the day's labor as usual. But when I looked out at the vegetable patch, something was wrong. Something had changed overnight. The garden wasn't just ripe. It looked plundered. The towering sunflowers had been snapped at the neck, their heavy heads gone. The most perfect, enormous butternut squash had been yanked clear from the vine, leaving a ragged wound in the dirt. And the tomato stakes, my carefully secured, tied-up tomato stakes, were scattered, as if a small animal had rampaged through the rows, indiscriminately tearing the fruit off the branches. It wasn't a subtle thinning. It looked like a sudden, violent, very specific cleanup job had taken place in the middle of the night. I ran to the back door, peering toward the woods line, half expecting to see a family of deer or maybe a hungry bear. But then I saw it. There, leaning against the side of the woodshed, perfectly lined up and stacked with the precision of a professional greengrocer, were 5 full bushel baskets, brimming with perfectly picked, flawless produce. The baskets were organized by type: baskets of potatoes, baskets of peppers, baskets of beans, and 2 overflowing baskets of the heirloom tomatoes. And standing over the haul, arms crossed, phone conspicuously absent from her hand, was Clara. She hadn't moved from that spot since I first saw her. She looked up at me, her expression not apologetic, not tired, but fiercely, almost aggressively satisfied. "I finished the harvest, Mom," she stated, her voice carrying across the yard, strong and clear for the first time all summer. "The frost is coming tonight, remember? I needed to make sure everything was safe." My jaw dropped. She had done all this? In the dark? In one night? It was an impossible amount of work, and she had done it without a single word, without turning on a single exterior light. I was reeling from the shock of her labor, the sheer, unexplained burst of effort. "Clara, this is incredible work, but why? Why didn't you say anything? I was just about to—" She cut me off, taking a slow, deliberate step toward me, and the fierce satisfaction in her eyes sharpened into something colder, something I didn't recognize. "I didn't need to say anything, Mom," she said, her gaze drifting pointedly toward the darkening woods behind the shed. "I just needed the crops to be ready, and they are." She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle between us. Now, the hard part begins. We have to deal with the buyer. The buyer? I echoed, the word tasting strange and metallic on my tongue. My mind was racing, trying to fit this new piece of information into the confusing puzzle of her summer behavior. I knew about the local farmers market, the small local network of artisanal food shops we sometimes sold surplus vegetables to, but Clara had always treated that side of things with utter disdain. What buyer, Clara? We usually just drop off what we can at Mrs. Henderson's stand on Saturdays. That's hardly a buyer requiring midnight harvests. Clara smiled, a thin, unnerving crescent that didn't reach her eyes. Mrs. Henderson is small-time, Mom. This is bigger. And frankly, I found a much better deal. I stepped closer to the pristine stacks of produce, suddenly noticing details I'd overlooked in my shock. The baskets weren't the old, splintered wicker ones we usually used. They were sturdy, new wooden crates, each neatly stenciled with an unfamiliar, elegant insignia, a coiled serpent around a stylized letter E. Where did these crates come from, and who are you talking to? You've been glued to your phone all summer, but you haven't mentioned any business dealings. My voice was rising now, the easy calm of a country morning shattering under the weight of her secrecy. I've been busy managing logistics, she replied, brushing a speck of dirt from a perfect red tomato with the back of her hand. It required focus, Mom, something you wouldn't understand, being so preoccupied with weeding. The casual dismissal stung, but the mystery of the crates and the serpentine logo was far more alarming. I tried to keep my tone level, reaching out to touch the firm skin of a bell pepper. Clara, I'm worried. You've been isolated, secretive, and now you've somehow managed to pull off a full harvest overnight, using professional equipment. Did someone help you? Is this a school project? Tell me what is going on before I call Mr. Davison down the road to see if he loaned you his truck. She let out a short, almost mocking laugh. Mr. Davison doesn't have the kind of transport I need for this kind of delivery, Mom. And no one helped me. I was perfectly capable of handling this myself. You just weren't paying attention to what I was doing, only what I wasn't doing. She pulled a small, encrypted-looking burner phone from the back pocket of her jeans, another new accessory, clearly, and flipped it open. The screen glowed with a complex map overlay. They're due here in under an hour. I told them I'd have the stock prepped and ready for loading before sunrise. We have to move these crates to the clearing by the old logging road. Move them. Clara, we can't just hand over bushels of food to strangers who show up in the middle of the night. Panic began to clamp down on my chest. This was moving past teenage eccentricity and into genuine trespass territory. Who is they? She sighed, an exaggerated sound of profound boredom, as if explaining basic economics to a toddler. They are the people who value high-quality, ethically sourced, hand-grown produce. They pay extremely well, and they value discretion. Discretion about what? About buying zucchini? I grabbed the handle of the nearest empty crate, intending to overturn it, to stop this madness before it started. I am your mother, and I forbid you from moving this food until you tell me who you are working with. Clara moved faster than I thought possible. She placed a hand on the crate, stopping my movement with surprising strength. Her grip was iron. You won't stop this, Mom, she said, her voice dropping to a low, steady register that was more threatening than any shouting. This isn't about zucchini. This is about leveraging the one asset this isolated property truly offers, something you've been squandering with your nostalgic gardening habits. My blood ran cold. What asset? What are you talking about? She tilted her head, those 17-year-old eyes suddenly seeming ancient and calculating. The isolation, Mom. The sheer, untouched, completely off-grid nature of this land. It makes everything grown here untraceable. And the quality of the soil. It's better than any lab-grown synthesis. Before I could process the chilling implications of untraceable and lab-grown synthesis being used in the same sentence regarding our heirloom tomatoes, the silence of the morning was violently broken. It wasn't the crunch of a single car on gravel. It was the heavy, rhythmic thud of multiple large engines slowing down, followed by the distinct mechanical hiss of air brakes. The sound wasn't coming from the gravel driveway leading to the cottage. It was coming from the old logging road, a mile deep in the woods, the road that hadn't seen active use since the 1980s. Clara looked at me, a flicker of something almost like urgency crossing her face, though it was quickly suppressed. "They're early. Get the crates to the clearing now, Mom. If they see you, they'll know I haven't secured the site properly and they won't pay." "I'm not moving anything until you tell me what kind of illegal operation you've set up here," I shouted, backing away toward the porch, my heart hammering against my ribs. Clara didn't argue further. Instead, she pivoted, moving with the same focused energy she'd used on the harvest, and sprinted toward the woodshed, not toward the clearing. She grabbed a heavy canvas tarp I used for covering the firewood and threw it over the stacked crates. "Fine, stay here, but you need to understand something crucial before you meet them." She paused at the edge of the shadows cast by the pines, her silhouette momentarily obscuring the dark woods beyond. "This summer, when I was ignoring you, I wasn't talking to friends, Mom. I was negotiating protection for this whole property, and now they're here to collect." She stepped into the deep shadows of the tree line, disappearing from sight as quickly as if the forest had swallowed her whole. A moment later, I heard the heavy tread of large, unfamiliar boots crunching on the damp pine needles, approaching not from the logging road, but from the trail leading directly behind the cottage. The footsteps were heavy, too synchronized, and there was a low, guttural sound of communication I couldn't decipher. I looked wildly toward the clearing where the crates were hidden, then back toward the dark trail where Clara had vanished, realizing I was trapped between an impossible harvest and a rapidly approaching deadline. I heard the first pair of boots emerge from the trail, and they weren't walking tentatively. They were marching, and the shape that stepped into the morning light wasn't a simple delivery driver, but a figure clad entirely in dark, reinforced tactical gear, their face obscured by a tightly fitted helmet, and something metallic glinting menacingly in their gloved hand. The figure stepped fully into the morning light, and I felt a strange, paralyzing wave of icy dread wash over me. It wasn't just the gear, the thick black Kevlar that seemed overkill for collecting vegetables. It was the stillness of the person inside it. They moved with the unnerving economy of motion you see in predators, not workers. They paused, their helmeted heads slowly rotating, scanning the yard, completely ignoring the perfectly stacked crates now hidden under the tarp. Their focus was entirely on me. "Where is the asset?" The voice that emerged was synthesized, electronically flattened, devoid of any human inflection. It was a voice designed to transmit orders, not have conversations. My throat had seized up. I managed a weak, shaky gesture toward the shed. The produce is over there, under the tarp. My daughter, Clara, she stacked it. She's gone to meet the others down the logging road. The tactical figure didn't even glance in the direction of the logging road. They took one deliberate step toward me, and the metallic object in their hand became undeniably clear. It wasn't a tool or a scanner. It was a specialized, high-grade, automatic weapon, held ready. "Clara is not the asset we are here for," the synthesized voice stated. "The asset is the supply chain manager. We were informed she was being held on site. Identify yourself." Asset? Supply chain manager? My head spun. This wasn't a dispute over payment for zucchini. This was something straight out of a dystopian thriller I never thought I'd be starring in. "I am her mother," I choked out, trying to project authority I didn't feel. "What is this? What has she gotten herself into? If this is about drugs or something illegal, she's just a kid. She doesn't understand." Before I could finish that futile defense, a second, identical figure emerged from the woods, flanking the first. Then a third, moving with the same silent, predatory efficiency. They were surrounding the perimeter of the small cottage. The first figure raised a hand, signaling the others to hold position. "The girl has been using this location for 3 months. She established the initial contact point. However, our internal intel suggests the primary operational nexus is located elsewhere, and that nexus is under parental control." "I control nothing," I insisted, backing up until my heels hit the rough wood of the porch steps. "I live here, yes, but Clara is the one who has been obsessed with her phone, making secret calls, receiving packages I didn't see." A small, sharp beep echoed from inside the house. It came from the kitchen, a sound I recognized instantly, the old magnetic timer I used for baking bread. I'd forgotten to turn it off after I'd made that loaf yesterday morning. The 3 tactical figures snapped their heads toward the sound, their weapons instantly reoriented toward the front door. Their combined attention was a physical weight pressing down on me. "The nexus is internal," the lead operative stated flatly. "Secure the perimeter. Breach on my mark." "Wait! That's just a kitchen timer," I pleaded, scrambling for the door handle. "It's nothing. It's for bread." But it was too late. The lead operative barked a command, and the other 2 moved with alarming speed. One kicked the side door, the one that led directly into the pantry and then the kitchen, with such force that the frame groaned in protest. The other one vaulted the steps, leveling the rifle directly at my chest. "Do not move, civilian. We are searching for proprietary data storage." I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for impact, for the searing pain of a bullet. But the expected sound never came. Instead, I heard a terrifyingly familiar sound, the distinctive electronic whirring of a drone taking off, followed by a high-pitched, almost insectile whine, growing rapidly louder overhead. And then, a new voice. This one female, clear and utterly calm, cutting through the tension like a laser. It came not from the house, not from the mercenaries, but from the area just beyond the berry bushes. "Cease fire, Unit 7. Unauthorized engagement with non-threat assets detected." The 3 tactical figures froze mid-advance, their attention instantly diverted upward. The one facing me slowly lowered his weapon, turning his helmeted head toward the source of the new voice. Clara stepped out from behind the overgrown raspberry canes. She wasn't wearing her dusty summer clothes anymore. She was wearing something sleek and dark, body-hugging material that looked utterly professional, complete with a slender silver device clipped to her collar. And hovering 3 feet above her shoulder, nearly silent, was a small, incredibly sophisticated drone, its multiple lenses pointed directly at the armed men. She looked directly at the lead operative, Unit 7, her composure chillingly absolute. "You were told to wait for my clearance on the delivery timeline," Clara said, her voice carrying a resonance that seemed amplified by the drone itself. "You violated terms of engagement, Unit 7. That constitutes a severe breach of contract." Unit 7 raised a hand, perhaps to radio his superiors, perhaps to signal retreat. But Clara made a subtle gesture with her own hand, tapping the silver device on her collar. The drone above her immediately shifted its trajectory, not toward the men, but toward the hidden bushel crates. In a blinding flash, a beam of intensely focused blue light shot down from the drone and enveloped the stack of vegetables under the tarp. The blue light was shockingly bright, lasting only a second, and when it vanished, the tarp looked completely undisturbed, yet the crates beneath it were visibly vibrating. "Mom," Clara said, not taking her eyes off the soldiers, "get inside the house, lock the doors, do not come out for anything." The Unit 7 operative, finally understanding the scale of the operation he had stumbled into, spoke into his radio, his synthesized voice now laced with genuine alarm. "Command, we have confirmation. The primary nexus is active. Repeat, the extraction target is on site and currently deploying countermeasures, requesting immediate hard extraction, code black." Clara smirked, a genuine victorious smirk this time. "Too late for extraction, Unit 7. You're dealing with proprietary tech now." She tapped her collar device again. The small drone accompanying her zipped forward with terrifying speed, but instead of engaging the soldiers, it dove directly toward the perfectly stacked bushel crates. As it touched the tarp, the entire mound of produce, hundreds of pounds of freshly harvested food, didn't just vibrate, it dematerialized. One moment the bounty was there, the next there was only undisturbed dirt and a scattering of dead leaves. The three armed men stared at the empty patch of earth, their discipline finally breaking. Unit 7 took a hesitant step backward, raising his rifle again, but not at Clara. He was aiming it back toward the silent woods where he'd heard the incoming extraction helicopters. Clara watched them with a predator's patience, waiting for them to realize they were trapped between their own backup and the disappearing evidence. "The payment is already wired, Unit 7, she called out coolly. "Consider this your severance package. Now get off my property before my real security detail arrives." As if on cue, the distant rumble of air traffic began to grow exponentially louder, not the sound of a single extraction team, but the deep, heavy thrumming of at least 3 massive, military-grade transports descending fast, their sound indicating they were targeting the small, secluded clearing by the old logging road. Clara's small burner phone began to ring with an incoming call from an unknown, untraceable satellite number. She watched the screen light up, waiting for the call to connect, her face a mask of anticipation. The moment the call connected, she raised the phone to her ear, her eyes fixed on the bewildered, heavily armed men standing frozen in her front yard. "Hello?" she answered, her voice smooth and professional. "Yes, this is the supplier. The inventory is clear. Where do you want me to deploy the next batch?" Clara listened to the voice on the satellite phone, her expression shifting from triumph to a strange, almost sorrowful resignation. She didn't speak for a full 30 seconds, just absorbing the incoming transmission, the harsh noise of the approaching heavy transport helicopters growing louder and louder, vibrating the very window panes of the cottage behind me. The tactical men, Unit 7 and his 2 subordinates, were clearly in a state of high-alert confusion. They were trained for retrieval or secure transport, not witnessing a sudden, localized mass disappearance of matter. They kept glancing between the empty patch of ground where the crates had been and the massive, rapidly closing shadow of the approaching aircraft. Finally, Clara lowered the phone slightly, though she kept the line open. She addressed the armed men without turning fully toward them. "They want confirmation that the transaction is clean," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. I still couldn't reconcile with my daughter. "They are moving to secure the secondary drop zone now. Your extraction window is closing in 90 seconds. Unit 7. If you are not airborne by then, you will be flagged as hostile assets by the incoming patrol." Unit 7 visibly bristled at being given orders by a teenager, but the threat embedded in her calm delivery was undeniable. His own tactical gear suddenly seemed cheap and obsolete compared to the sleek sophistication surrounding Clara. "Who sent you?" Unit 7 demanded, his voice losing some of its electronic flatness, edged now with genuine fear. "Who are you working for? This is outside any known parameters." Clara turned, finally giving them her full attention, and I realized with a sick lurch that she wasn't just negotiating for vegetables. She was playing a game with rules far above my comprehension, and I was standing squarely in the crossfire. "I'm working for the future, Unit 7, she said, her eyes glittering dangerously. "And right now, the future requires that you leave my property. Quietly." She held up the phone again, pressing a button, and a sound, a rapid, high-frequency burst of clicks and static, filled the yard, completely drowning out the helicopters for a critical moment. The sound seemed to physically pain the armored men. Unit 7 clutched his helmet, stumbling back a step. His subordinates dropped their rifles to the ground, clutching their own heads, their tactical discipline dissolving into primal reaction against the sonic assault. "It's a localized disruptor frequency," Clara explained to me, though she spoke as if lecturing a colleague. "It scrambles their internal comms and scrambles neural synchronization, just enough to make them easy to manage." As the sound faded, the men remained disoriented, swaying slightly. Clara took 2 steps toward the porch, her focus shifting entirely to me. "Mom, go inside, lock the deadbolt. The utility room. Now." Before I could move, before I could ask what she meant by utility room, when the only utility room held the rusty lawnmower and bags of fertilizer, the massive drone accompanying Clara zipped silently away from her shoulder and shot toward the cottage's roofline. It hovered directly over the chimney, bathing it in the same intense blue light it had used on the vegetables. This time, the effect wasn't dematerialization. Instead, a section of the cedar shingles around the chimney seemed to unzip itself, peeling back with impossible precision to reveal a dark metallic hatch beneath the roof structure. "That," Clara said, gesturing with an almost bored sweep of her hand toward the newly revealed hatch, "is the real nexus. The storage, the servers, the things they were really interested in." The 3 armed men, snapping out of their brief stupor, saw the hatch too. Their confusion immediately morphed back into savage focus. They realized the true prize wasn't the food. It was whatever was hidden beneath the roof. Unit 7 roared, a raw human sound this time, ignoring the lingering pain. He lunged away from his fallen rifle and sprinted not toward his approaching extraction, but directly toward the cottage door, aiming to neutralize the parent before accessing the hidden control center. "Mom! Get to the utility room!" Clara yelled, but she didn't move to intercept him. Instead, she turned fully toward the 3 men, her hand hovering over the collar device once more. "If you damage the facility, you forfeit the retrieval contract," she warned the charging soldier. Unit 7 ignored her, slamming his armored shoulder into the porch railing, splintering the old wood. He reached the front door just as the first of the massive transport helicopters swept low over the tree line, its downdraft whipping leaves and dirt into a violent vortex. I had maybe 3 seconds. The utility room, the dusty space off the kitchen, was too far. My instinct, honed by years of passive motherhood, screamed to protect my child, even this terrifying, unrecognizable version of her. I grabbed the heaviest object within reach, an old cast-iron skillet I'd left drying on the counter. As Unit 7 braced himself for his second attempt at the front door, I rushed forward from the porch steps, adrenaline flooding my system, and swung the skillet with all the desperate, misplaced strength of a mother protecting her home. The skillet connected with the side of his helmet with a deafening clang. The sound echoed strangely, muffled by the advanced composite material, but it was enough. Unit 7's charge faltered. He staggered sideways, momentarily stunned, his massive frame listing dangerously toward the open porch railing. Clara watched the entire exchange, me hitting the soldier with kitchenware, with wide, shocked eyes. It was the first time since June she'd seen me act spontaneously, and it had successfully halted the immediate threat. "Mom, no!" she screamed, but not in warning. It was a sound of sheer panic. Unit 7, regaining his balance, didn't swing back. Instead, he slammed his palm against the side of his helmet one last time. His body went rigid, and then, a split second before the roar of the descending helicopters became overwhelming, his own weapon, the specialized automatic rifle he had dropped, lifted itself off the ground. It didn't fly into his hand. It aimed itself with chilling, flawless accuracy, not at Clara, not at me, but directly at the vulnerable, unarmored roof hatch that was still open above the chimney. "If I can't have the data, you burn the access point." A strained, choked sound came from Unit 7 as he seemed to fight against his own movements, an unseen remote command overriding his training. Clara shrieked, lunging toward him, trying to physically tackle the man she'd briefly subdued. "Stop him! That's the core terminal!" But it was too late. The rifle fired 3 controlled bursts. The first 2 rounds struck the exposed metal of the hatch mechanism. The third round, however, didn't hit metal. It punched cleanly through the thin, exposed roofing material directly beside the hatch, striking something deep inside the structure that was clearly not hardware. There was no explosion. Instead, a thick, viscous substance, glowing with a faint, sickly emerald-green luminescence, immediately began to ooze out of the bullet hole, dripping slowly onto the shingles. The moment the green liquid touched the cedar wood, the entire structure around the chimney began to smoke, not with the white smoke of fire, but with a heavy, acrid, black vapor that smelled intensely of ozone and something deeply organic, like spoiled meat and burning metal. Clara stopped dead, staring at the oozing green fluid, her entire plan collapsing in an instant. She stared at me, then at the glowing ooze, her face slack with terror. "That wasn't the server?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the helicopters now directly overhead. "That was the fail-safe. Mom, that was the biological anchor." The sight of the emerald seepage was a breaking point. It wasn't just the glow or the acrid smell. It was the way Clara reacted. The composed, calculating operative who had orchestrated a phantom harvest evaporated, replaced by the scared, overwhelmed girl I thought I knew. "The anchor? What are you talking about, Clara?" I demanded, dropping the skillet, my focus instantly splitting between the still swaying Unit 7 and the horror unfolding on the roof. It's what keeps the growth stable," she cried, finally looking truly panicked. She backed away from the soldiers, away from the landing zone of the incoming aircraft, toward me, toward the only reality she hadn't manufactured this summer. It's the nutrient bath for the accelerated growth vectors if it contaminates the soil. The two other soldiers, seeing their commander momentarily incapacitated and the target structure compromised, made a sudden unified decision. They abandoned the idea of breaching the house, turning instead toward the looming shadows of the descending transports. They started running towards the logging road trail, desperate to reach their extraction point before their backup arrived and potentially snag them for failing their mission. Clara didn't try to stop them. She simply watched them go, her breathing ragged. They're cutting their losses. They know the site is compromised. The nearest helicopter was now so low that the downdraft buffeted the cottage violently, shaking the entire structure. Dust, pine needles, and loose shingles flew everywhere. I could see figures in similar tactical gear beginning to rappel down ropes onto the forest floor nearby. "We have to get out of here!" I shouted, grabbing her arm, pulling her toward the front door, intending to flee toward the main road, away from the chaos descending on the clearing. Clara resisted my pull with surprising strength. "No, not yet. The anchor has to be neutralized, or the whole area becomes toxic. It spreads fast." She spun around, snatching the small silver-clipped device from her collar, the same device that controlled the drone. The drone has one last function programmed. It can contain the breach, but I have to be close enough to input the dispersal sequence. She looked at the gaping hole in the roof, the sickly green fluid still pulsing faintly as it dripped. The air was thick with the black vapor now, burning my lungs. "Clara, that liquid is toxic. You can't go near it," I pleaded, terrified she was about to sacrifice herself for whatever bizarre, secret agricultural venture she had conjured. She shot me a look of pure, desperate intensity. "Mom, for once this summer, you need to trust me completely. I designed this whole system to be self-sustaining, but I didn't design it for sabotage. I need 10 seconds. She didn't wait for my consent. She sprinted across the yard, leaping over the remnants of the porch railing with an agility that belonged to a trained operative, not a high school student. She scrambled up onto the roof, a feat that seemed impossible given the steep angle and the slickness of the emerging residue, and knelt beside the smoking hole. The soldiers who had fled moments ago were now fully visible, sprinting toward the clearing, their radios presumably screaming warnings about the chemical breach. They were abandoning their comrades who had been temporarily stunned, prioritizing escape over the compromised asset. Clara jammed the silver device into the hole next to the green ooze. She didn't touch the liquid itself, working with frantic precision around the edges. Her fingers flew across the device's tiny interface. "Dispersal sequence initializing," she muttered, her voice barely carrying over the helicopter roar. "Neutralizing contaminant. 5 seconds." Suddenly, a sharp metallic crack echoed over the din. It wasn't the helicopter gunfire. It was closer, originating from the tree line where the running soldiers had just disappeared. A round had struck something in the clearing, the ground perhaps, or maybe a decoy. Clara flinched, her concentration wavering. The green drip paused, then seemed to thicken, the glow intensifying. 4 seconds, she forced out, leaning closer to the smoking aperture. That was when a new sound cut through the air, the sound of a massive body hitting the porch steps below me. Unit 7, having seemingly shaken off the worst of the neural disruption, had doubled back. He wasn't running for his extraction. He was running for the nearest clear line of fire, the one aimed at the teenager on the roof. He raised his rifle again, aiming past me, past the smoke, directly at Clara's exposed back. Instinct took over. I didn't think about bioanchors or proprietary data. I thought about 17 years of sleepless nights and scraped knees. I launched myself off the porch, throwing my entire body weight against Unit 7's legs just as his finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle discharged, a deafening crack. The bullet didn't hit Clara. It struck the antenna array mounted just above the hatch where she was working. The impact vaporized the antenna, sending a shower of sparks into the already toxic air. The shockwave, combined with the impact, threw Unit 7 backward off the porch entirely. He tumbled down the small embankment, landing with a heavy thud near the berry bushes, his helmet flying off in the process, revealing a very human, very pale face contorted in pain. On the roof, Clara let out a sharp cry of success. Done. Dispersal engaged. The sickening green fluid immediately stopped glowing. The black smoke receded as quickly as it had arrived, drawn back into the hole like water down a drain. The smell dissipated, leaving only the clean, sharp scent of pine and damp earth. The hatch, with a quiet, almost apologetic whir, sealed itself shut, the cedar shingles reknitting perfectly over the metal surface. Clara slid down the roof and dropped the last few feet onto the grass, landing lightly beside me, breathing heavily. She looked at the stunned, sprawled Unit 7, then at the two other soldiers who were now frozen midway between the woods and the logging road, realizing their extraction was moments away and their objective was nullified. "It's over," she whispered, brushing soot from her cheek. She looked at me, truly looked at me, her eyes the familiar hazel I remembered, though shadowed by immense fatigue. The whole summer, I was preparing the harvest for the transfer, but I was also building a counter-protocol, a self-destruct sequence in case someone tried to weaponize the growth acceleration. They found out before I could secure the data, and they thought you were the key to accessing it. The heavy transport helicopters were now hovering directly over the logging road clearing, their powerful spotlights illuminating the area. A speaker boomed, echoing through the valley. "All unauthorized personnel, drop weapons and await instruction. This area is now under federal quarantine." Clara stepped over to the fallen Unit 7, plucked the small satellite phone from her pocket, and dialed another number. "Extraction complete," she stated into the phone, her voice regaining its professional composure. "The hostile unit is neutralized, and the asset integrity is confirmed. Prepare for immediate secondary retrieval of personnel. Yes, both of them, and tell them to bring the paperwork. We need to discuss the new terms of acquisition for the entire property." She paused, a slight exhausted smile touching her lips as she looked at me, standing there holding the cast-iron skillet, the unlikely hero of her secret war. "And tell them that the mother gets final sign-off on all future development proposals.